I was late for the most important meeting of my life, the meeting that would decide my future with David. The moment had arrived. I had been dreading this day for so long. The day I would finally meet his father, Mr. Arthur Sterling. A billionaire, a legend in the financial world, a man who had built an empire from nothing but had become a recluse years ago, retreating into the seclusion of his enormous mansion. I had heard so much about him, but no one had ever seen him in years. So when David, my fiancé, told me about the dinner, it felt surreal. It felt like something out of a movie. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a test, and I was about to take it. The invitation wasn't an invitation at all. It was a summons. An email from a law firm, cold and impersonal, said that Mr. Arthur Sterling requested the presence of his son, Mr. David Sterling, and his companion, Ms. Ava Peters, for a formal dinner at his private residence. No formal greeting, just an order. And that was when I knew this dinner wasn't just about David and me. It was about proving my worth. David had warned me countless times, telling me stories about how his father had disowned his older brother for marrying a woman he didn't approve of. He wasn't going to let that happen again. The stakes couldn't be higher. The week leading up to this dinner felt like one of the longest of my life. I had to follow a long list of rules. Don't talk about my job. His father despised charity work. Don't mention my humble background. His father was all about wealth and status. The dress I was told to wear was a navy blue number, something David had picked out for me, and a cashmere scarf that cost more than I had ever spent on myself. Appearance mattered. Punctuality mattered even more. David's father valued time above all else, and being late meant failure. So, there I was, the day of the dinner, rehearsing everything I had been told to say, how to look, how to act. I didn't even recognize myself. I wasn't preparing to meet a future father-in-law, I was preparing to face a judge, and the trial was about to begin. As the day went on, my nerves started to take hold. I had to take the train to his estate, which was about an hour away from the city. David had gone ahead to prepare. I knew that I had to take a taxi from the station to the estate, but I couldn't shake the feeling of suffocation. The pressure of the day felt like it was closing in on me, and I needed space to think. The walk from the station to the estate should have been short, just about a mile, but it felt like a journey into another world. I walked down streets lined with grand mansions, each one hidden behind tall hedges and gates, almost like they were daring me to enter. I felt out of place. I wasn't from this world. I was just a girl who worked at a nonprofit, whose parents were ordinary people. I wasn't one of them. And yet, I couldn't help but feel that this dinner, this night, would determine everything. My future, David's future, and everything in between. I kept checking my watch. I was cutting it close. I still had about 20 minutes before I would be truly late, but I was already feeling the weight of the day on my shoulders. That was when I saw him. The old man was sitting on a park bench by the side of the road, his clothes ragged and worn. His face was lined with the signs of a hard life. He was shivering in the cool afternoon air, and I could see his thin jacket was no match for the breeze. My first instinct, conditioned by the frantic instructions from David, was to ignore him, to keep walking, to stay focused. But then I looked into his eyes, and something inside me stopped. There was sadness in his gaze, a deep, silent sadness that made me pause. The pressure of the day, the weight of the task ahead, all of it seemed to fade in that moment. I thought of my grandmother's voice, the one she had always said, "The measure of a person's character is how they treat those who can do nothing for them." I couldn't walk past him. I just couldn't. So I walked over to the bench, my heart racing, but I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I approached him gently, not wanting to disturb him. "Excuse me, sir," I said softly. "Are you all right?" He looked up at me, and his eyes, though tired, were sharp, a deep blue that seemed to see right through me. "Just a bit cold, young lady," he said, his voice rough, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. I seemed to have missed the lunch service at the local shelter. I couldn't ignore him. I pulled out the sandwich I had packed for myself. A simple turkey and Swiss sandwich, wrapped in foil, but it was all I had. Without a second thought, I offered it to him. "Here," I said. "It's not much, but it's yours." He looked at it, then at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. After a long moment, he nodded and took the sandwich. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. "That is very kind." I saw him shiver again, and before I could stop myself, I pulled the scarf from around my neck. The cashmere scarf that David had insisted I wear, the scarf that cost more than my entire outfit. But in that moment, it didn't matter. "You need this more than I do," I said softly, draping it over his shoulders. He looked at the scarf, and then back at me. His eyes were deep, almost knowing. "You are a very kind woman," he said, and I could feel the weight of his words. But I didn't have time to think about it. I glanced at my watch and froze. I was officially late. 12 minutes late. I had failed before I even got to the mansion. My stomach twisted with anxiety, but I had done something that felt right, something that made me feel human again. I hurried away, trying to shake off the sinking feeling in my chest. The reality of what was ahead hit me hard. I was late, and there was nothing I could do about it now. I had already broken one of David's cardinal rules. But I couldn't regret what I had done. The kindness I had shown to that old man felt more important than anything else. And with that, I rushed towards the estate, knowing that no matter what happened now, I had already passed a test that was far more important than anything David's father could put in front of me. I hurried toward the estate, my mind racing with thoughts of what awaited me. I had already failed David's test, and now, with every step I took closer to the mansion, I could feel the weight of my mistake. I was late, and I knew David's father valued punctuality above all else. The thought of his disapproving eyes made my stomach churn, but I couldn't undo what had already happened. The old man on the park bench, the kindness I had shown him, those were the things that mattered now, not the hours of preparation that had led me here. But I still couldn't shake the growing dread that my one moment of compassion had ruined everything. The gates to the Sterling estate loomed ahead, towering and imposing. Two massive wrought iron gates stood in front of me, adorned with the intricate golden S that was so synonymous with wealth, power, and legacy. The gates creaked open slowly, and I walked through them, feeling the gravity of the situation weigh heavily on me with each step. I could hear the sound of my heels clicking on the immaculate driveway, but it felt as though the silence of the estate was swallowing the sound of everything around me. This was no ordinary mansion. This was a place where everything had to be perfect, where flaws weren't just hidden, they were punished. I approached the front steps, the towering pillars and marble that seemed to exude coldness and wealth. David was standing at the top, pacing back and forth, his eyes locked on his phone. He wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of anxiety, his movements sharp and quick. I could tell he was waiting for me, but there was no welcoming warmth in his posture, no excitement to see me. Instead, there was fear, a fear that had been building in him for days, and I could feel it like a living thing. The moment he saw me coming up the steps, his face hardened, his mouth set in a grim line. I saw his shoulders tighten, and his lips parted, but there were no words. He was fuming. His eyes darted to my neck, then to the watch on my wrist, and then to my shoes, everything about me was being scrutinized in a way I had never experienced before. "Ava," he said, his voice low and furious. "Where in God's name have you been?" I froze in front of him, trying to collect my breath. I hadn't expected this. I thought he would be relieved to see me, not angry. But in his eyes, I saw something much darker, a storm brewing. I had failed him, and he wasn't hiding his frustration. "David, I'm so sorry," I stammered, trying to explain, but the words didn't seem to make sense. I was walking from the station, and I saw this old man on a park bench. He was cold, and his face twisted in disbelief. "You saw a homeless man and you stopped to talk to him?" His voice grew louder with each word. "This is important, Ava. We are talking about the future of our lives here. You stopped for a homeless man?" I tried to stay calm, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. David, he was cold. He didn't have anything. I couldn't just walk past him. David's eyes narrowed, and his jaw clenched. He turned away from me, muttering something under his breath. His fingers were gripping the edges of his phone tightly, like he was ready to throw it against the stone walls surrounding us. "I don't know what you were thinking, Ava. This is everything to me. Everything. I told you how important this dinner was. You had one job. To show up on time, to be perfect, to make a good impression, and you ruined it." I felt the sting of his words. They were sharp and cold, just like his father. But beneath his anger, I could see the fear in his eyes. He wasn't mad at me. He was scared that I had done something that would destroy his chances of winning his father's approval. He was scared that his life, his inheritance, everything he had worked for, was slipping through his fingers because of my mistake. The truth hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't just about a dinner. This was about David's deep, desperate need for validation. He had spent his whole life chasing approval, and I was just one more thing that could go wrong in his quest to be seen as worthy in his father's eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered, looking down at my feet. "I never meant to hurt you." But it wasn't just his anger that I had to worry about now. It was the real test that awaited inside. As we stood on the front porch, I could already hear the distant murmur of voices coming from inside the mansion. The grandeur of the space seemed to taunt me. Each step felt like a step toward an execution. We had no choice but to go inside, but I felt my knees shaking as I followed David into the house. The door swung open, and the smell of rich, expensive wood and polished floors hit me all at once. The butler, tall and gaunt with sharp, almost predatory features, greeted us without a word, simply gesturing toward the hall. David barely glanced at me as he followed the butler down the vast corridors, his eyes still hard, his anger still simmering beneath the surface. I wanted to say something, to apologize again, but there was no point. He wouldn't hear me now. We were led down a hallway lined with priceless works of art, their eyes following us as we walked by. Everything was grand, everything was cold, and everything had a price. It felt like walking through a museum, not a home. My own presence in the space felt like an intruder. The walls themselves seemed to judge me, as though they could see right through me and my simple background. The butler led us to a pair of tall, dark wooden doors that seemed to weigh hundreds of pounds. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the dining room," he said, his voice monotone, almost as if he had repeated the sentence 1,000 times before. David straightened his suit, his hands still trembling. His eyes were wide, but not with hope. No, they were filled with anxiety, pure, unfiltered anxiety. He turned to me, his voice a whisper. "Remember, don't say anything stupid. Don't talk about the homeless man. Don't mention the scarf. Just be perfect." As the doors swung open, the grand dining room came into view. The chandeliers hung like looming giants, and the long, polished table stretched out before us, covered with gleaming plates and silverware. It was a scene out of a movie, a scene where everything had to be flawless. The only thing that wasn't perfect was the man at the far end of the table. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. There, sitting alone at the head of the table, was the man from the park bench. The homeless man. The same old man who had shivered in the cold and accepted my sandwich with a look of quiet gratitude. This was the moment. The one I had feared, and yet it was the one that I had somehow predicted. David, finally noticing my shock, followed my gaze. His face drained of all color, and his eyes widened in disbelief. "Father?" David's voice was weak, unsure. "What are you doing here? What is this?" Arthur Sterling, David's father, looked up slowly, his eyes meeting mine, and smiled. "Welcome, Ava," he said warmly. "Please, take a seat. I do apologize for my appearance earlier today. It's an old habit of mine." The room fell into complete silence as I stood frozen at the doorway, my mind racing, trying to process what was happening. The man who had seemed so cold, so distant, the one who had built an empire, was the same man who had sat on the park bench, shivering and hungry. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This was no coincidence. And just like that, the game had changed. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do next. The man who had been a stranger to me, who I had helped on a whim, was now sitting at the head of the table, in the mansion where I had thought I was about to be judged. The man I had given my lunch and scarf to, the man who seemed to have nothing, was now the center of everything. He was not just the homeless man, he was Mr. Arthur Sterling, the father of my fiancé, the billionaire who had built an empire and retreated from the world. David's face drained of color. I had never seen him so shaken. He had spent the past week, no, the past 2 years, preparing for this dinner, trying to navigate the rules of his father's rigid expectations, and now it seemed as though everything had been turned upside down. David had built his whole life around seeking his father's approval. He had told me so many times how hard it had been growing up with a father who valued wealth, appearance, and power above all else. But this? This was something no one had prepared him for. It was beyond his understanding, beyond anything we had imagined. And in that moment, I realized how much he had been shaped by his father's standards. His entire sense of self-worth was wrapped up in Arthur Sterling's approval, and I was just a small part of that equation. A part that, in his eyes, had failed. But Arthur Sterling, David's father, didn't seem to care about any of that. He looked at me, his blue eyes clear and steady, and smiled warmly. It wasn't the cold, calculating smile I had expected from a man with so much power. It was a genuine, human smile, the kind you'd give someone you actually cared about. The kind you'd give a daughter. And suddenly, everything about this dinner felt different. It felt like a test that none of us had prepared for, and I had no idea what the next step was. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't going to be the dinner I had imagined. "Please, Ava," Arthur Sterling said, his voice raspy but full of warmth. "Come, take a seat. We have much to discuss." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt completely disconnected from reality. How could this be happening? How could the man I had helped just an hour ago be the same man sitting at the head of the table? I felt a wave of confusion, but also a strange sense of calm. Perhaps this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment that would show me what truly mattered. David stood there for a moment, his face twisted in disbelief. "Father, what is this? Why are you dressed like that? What is going on?" Arthur smiled again, but this time there was a slight edge to it. David, you've been trained to care about appearances your entire life. But what does that really mean? I built my empire on hard work, yes, but also on values, values that I can only see when people think no one is watching. When they think no one is judging them. When they are being real. And when you were all concerned about looking perfect, Ava here showed me what truly matters. David's confusion deepened. You don't understand. This is the most important night of our lives. This dinner, this is what will determine our future. Arthur raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. No, David. What will determine your future is not how you look, not what you wear, but how you treat others. How you see the world around you, and the people in it. And Ava, this young woman who you've been so focused on impressing, she showed me exactly what I needed to see. I could feel the tension building. David's world had just come crashing down around him. I could see it in his eyes. He was lost. All those years of trying to live up to his father's impossible standards had led him to this moment, a moment where everything was suddenly meaningless. And yet, Arthur remained calm, steady, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This wasn't what I had expected, not by a long shot. But I couldn't deny that something about the way Arthur was speaking resonated with me. It wasn't about appearances. It wasn't about perfection. It was about who we were, deep down, when no one was watching. It was about kindness, integrity, and compassion. Arthur's gaze turned to me, and I felt his eyes searching me, looking for something. Ava, I want you to know something, he said, his voice soft but firm. You passed the only test that truly matters. And it wasn't about being on time. It wasn't about following rules. It was about who you are as a person. You chose kindness over everything else. And that is what I value most. I felt a lump form in my throat as I sat down at the table, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. It was a reckoning. A test of character. And it seemed that, in this strange twist of fate, I had passed it. But how would David react to all of this? How would he handle his father's unexpected praise for me? I could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him, the weight of everything he had believed in suddenly crumbling before his eyes. David finally sat down at the far end of the table, away from me. I could see the defeat in his posture, the way he slumped in his chair as though the world had just crumbled beneath his feet. Arthur's eyes never left him, but there was no malice in them. There was only a quiet sadness, as if he knew this moment would come. He had been waiting for it, and now it had arrived. David had to face the truth about his own life, his own values, and what really mattered. The butler, silent and efficient, began serving the first course. The sound of the silver clinking against the plates was the only noise in the room, a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. As the first course was placed in front of me, I tried to focus on the food, on the simple act of eating, but my mind kept returning to the scene that had just unfolded. Arthur continued speaking, but his attention was now on me. He asked questions about my work at the nonprofit, about my childhood, about my family. I told him about my parents, about the small house we had grown up in, and the values they had instilled in me. I spoke with a confidence I hadn't felt before, knowing that, for once, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't trying to be something I wasn't. I was simply being myself, and that seemed to be enough. David remained silent, barely touching his food. His gaze was fixed on the table, as though he couldn't bring himself to look at either of us. The silence between father and son was deafening. It wasn't until Arthur reached over, his hand still warm from the scarf I had given him, and placed it gently on the table between us, that I realized just how far we had come. The man I had helped just an hour ago wasn't just a homeless stranger. He was my future father-in-law, and he had just shown me that everything I thought I knew about David, and about myself, was wrong. "I'm sorry," David finally whispered, his voice barely audible, breaking the silence. "I was wrong. I've spent so much time trying to please my father, trying to be someone I'm not, that I lost sight of what really matters." Arthur nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "It's never too late to change, David. But you must understand that you can't keep running after something that doesn't matter. You have a woman here who understands what true worth is. She's the one who showed me that. She's the one who is worth having by your side." David looked at me, his eyes full of emotion. For the first time that evening, I saw him for who he really was, a man who had been trying to prove himself to a father who would never truly accept him unless he learned to accept himself first. And in that moment, I realized that David's journey wasn't just about his father's approval, it was about finding peace with who he was, with the life he wanted to live, and the person he wanted to become. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of conversation, though much of it was focused on Arthur and me. As the evening wore on, I felt myself growing more comfortable in the presence of this man who had once seemed so distant and cold. And when the dessert was served, Arthur turned to me and smiled. "You've proven something tonight, Ava," he said quietly. "You've proven that kindness is the one thing in this world that can't be bought or faked. And for that, you've earned my respect." David was silent the whole time, but when we finally stood to leave, he spoke once more. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for showing me what I couldn't see. Thank you for being the person you are." I smiled, knowing that this dinner had changed everything for all of us. As we walked out of the grand dining room, the weight of the evening was still heavy on my shoulders. I felt a sense of relief, but it was tinged with a new awareness, one that had been slowly unfolding over the course of the night. Arthur had shown me a side of him that was both unexpected and profound. But there was still so much left unsaid between David and me. The silence that followed us down the hallway was almost unbearable. David walked beside me, his footsteps hesitant, as though he were still processing everything that had happened. I could see it in his eyes. He was torn between the man he had always tried to be and the person he had just discovered himself to be. We reached the front door, where the butler waited silently by the entrance, his face impassive as always. Arthur had already gone ahead, leaving us to catch up. The air outside felt cold against my skin as we stepped onto the porch, but the crispness of the night was a welcome relief after the stifling tension inside. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head, but it was no use. The words I had heard inside the mansion still lingered in my mind. Arthur's voice, calm and unwavering, echoed in my thoughts. "You've proven something tonight, Ava. You've proven that kindness is the one thing in this world that can't be bought or faked." Those words had struck a chord deep within me. It wasn't about wealth or status, about who we knew or how we looked. It was about what we did when no one was watching. What we did when the world wasn't looking. Arthur had recognized that in me, and in doing so, he had shown me a side of him that I never could have imagined. But as I stood there on the porch, the silence between David and me felt suffocating. I couldn't tell if it was because we were both processing everything that had just happened or because David was still struggling with the realization that his father had just turned the tables on him. The man who had spent his entire life chasing approval had just been shown, in front of everyone, that the one thing that mattered most was not what he had always sought, but what he had overlooked all along. "Ava," David said, his voice soft, breaking the silence. "I don't know what to say. Everything about tonight. It's not how I thought it would go." I turned to him, my heart heavy with understanding. "David, I said, my voice gentle but firm. This isn't about how you thought it would go. It's about who you are. And who you want to be. You've spent so much time trying to prove yourself to your father, but the truth is, you've never needed to. You've always been enough. David looked at me, his eyes filled with conflict. But, you don't understand. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to my father's expectations. And now, after everything that happened tonight, I don't even know who I am anymore. I took a step closer to him, my hand reaching out to touch his arm. David, I understand more than you think. I've spent my whole life trying to prove myself too. But this is your life. And you don't have to live it according to anyone else's rules. Not your father's, not mine. Just yours. He let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if I can do that, Ava. I've been so focused on being what everyone expects me to be that I don't even know where to start. You start with yourself, I said, my voice steady. You start by being honest with yourself about what you really want. Not what your father wants. Not what anyone else wants. Just you. David's eyes softened as he looked at me, a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability in his expression. For the first time that night, I saw him as he truly was, someone who had spent years hiding behind the walls of his own insecurities, afraid of being seen for who he really was. But now, as I stood there with him, I realized that the only way forward was for both of us to embrace who we were, flaws, mistakes, and all. I've spent so much time trying to live up to his expectations, David said quietly, almost to himself. But I've lost sight of what I really want. What I really need. I nodded. It's never too late to figure that out. And I'll be here with you, every step of the way. David looked at me, his expression softening. Thank you, Ava. For everything. I don't deserve you. I shook my head. No, David. You do. You just need to believe it. The sound of a car pulling up broke the moment between us, and we both turned to see Arthur's sleek black car idling at the bottom of the steps. The driver, a tall, expressionless man in a black suit, got out and opened the door for us. It was time to leave. The night had come to an end, but I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for all of us. David and I climbed into the car in silence. The drive back to our apartment was long and quiet. I didn't know what David was thinking, but I could feel the tension in the air. It was the same tension that had hung over us for months, for years, David's constant struggle to live up to his father's impossible expectations. But now, as we sat in the back of that car, I could sense that something had shifted. Something had changed in him. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of the change that would finally free him from the weight of his father's shadow. When we finally arrived at our apartment, the city lights twinkling outside the windows, David didn't say a word. He simply opened the door and walked inside, his shoulders slumped, but his posture somehow different. Less burdened. Less afraid. I followed him inside, my mind still processing everything that had happened. The evening had been a whirlwind of emotions, shock, disbelief, realization, but in the quiet of our apartment, I could feel the weight of the night lifting. We had faced the impossible, and we had come out on the other side stronger for it. David sat down on the couch, his hands clasped together as he stared ahead. For a moment, I wondered if he would say anything at all. But then, with a soft sigh, he turned to me. I need to talk to my father, he said, his voice low but determined. I need to tell him how I feel. Not what I think he wants to hear. But what I really feel. I smiled. That's a start, David. That's a real start. He smiled back, and for the first time that night, it felt like he was seeing the truth. The truth about who he was. The truth about what mattered most. As the night wore on, we sat together in silence, both of us processing everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew that our lives had already changed. The dinner, the test, Arthur's unexpected approval, it had all led us here, to this moment. And though I couldn't predict the future, I knew one thing for sure: it would be ours to shape. The next few days passed in a blur. The weight of what had transpired still hung heavy in the air, but there was something different about David now. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that mansion, terrified of his father's judgment. No, this David was someone who was beginning to understand who he was, who he wanted to be. And it was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He no longer felt the need to prove himself to anyone, not to his father, not to me, and most importantly, not to himself. I had seen him go through so many transformations, so many ups and downs, but this was different. And in the days that followed, as the world outside went on with its noise and rush, David and I began to rebuild, piece by piece, the foundation of our relationship. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But for the first time, it felt real. We weren't living for anyone else's approval. We were living for ourselves. David had said he needed to talk to his father. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I knew that when the moment came, he would be ready. There was no more hiding behind fear, no more running from the truth. The truth was what mattered now. The truth about us, about what we wanted, and about what we were willing to fight for. The call came 3 days later. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, when David walked in, his phone pressed to his ear. I could see the determination in his eyes even before he spoke. "I'm meeting him tomorrow," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We're having lunch. Just the two of us." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, the moment David had been waiting for. The moment he would confront his father, not as a terrified son looking for approval, but as an equal. As a man who knew his worth. "I'll be right here, no matter what happens," I said, offering him a reassuring smile. David nodded, his gaze softening. "I know, Ava. I've been so afraid of disappointing him all these years, but now, I think it's time I stopped living in fear. It's time I started living for myself." The next day, as I watched David leave, I felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. This was his journey, his fight to reclaim his identity. But I couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Arthur Sterling was not just any father. He was a legend, a man who had built his fortune on ruthless ambition. What if he didn't accept David for who he had become? What if the man who had shown us kindness in the most unexpected of ways was still the father who disowned his own son over trivial matters? David was already on his way to meet Arthur by the time I allowed myself to entertain those thoughts. I tried to focus on the quiet of the apartment, but my mind wouldn't settle. I had never seen David so determined, so calm in the face of something so monumental. He was going to confront the man who had shaped his entire life, for better or for worse. And I knew, deep down, that this moment was going to change everything. Hours passed, and I tried not to think too much about what was happening on the other side of town. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that I got the text. It went well. He listened. And I finally told him everything. I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. Tears of relief welled up in my eyes as I read the words. I could feel the weight of David's journey lifting from his shoulders, lifting from mine as well. The past was behind us. The future, uncertain as it was ours to shape. No more games. No more playing by someone else's rules. I called David immediately, and after a few rings, he picked up. His voice sounded lighter than it had in years. "Hey," he said, his voice soft, but there was a warmth in it I hadn't heard before. "I just wanted to let you know." He said some things I didn't expect. He didn't agree with everything, but he listened. He actually listened, Ava. I could hear the relief in his voice, the burden that had been lifted. "And what did you say?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. David was quiet for a moment, as if thinking about his words carefully. I told him I wasn't going to live my life for him anymore. That I needed to do this for myself. I needed to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't, just to make him proud. I told him that I had been hiding for too long, and that I wasn't afraid anymore. And? David chuckled softly. And he said he respected that. He told me it wasn't easy for him, but he's willing to try. He wants to get to know me again. Not as the son he always expected, but as the man I've become. I exhaled slowly, a deep breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was it. This was the turning point. For David. For us. "That's incredible, David," I said, my voice full of pride. "I'm so proud of you." He was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke again, his tone softer. "I couldn't have done it without you, Ava. You were right. I've been living for the wrong reasons, and it's time to change that. It's time to live for us." The days that followed felt like a slow, steady rebuild. David and Arthur spent more time together, learning how to navigate their complex relationship. There were still moments of tension, of course, old habits die hard, but there was also something new between them. Respect. Understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were all on the same page. As the weeks went by, we began to find our rhythm. David and I started making plans for the future, real plans, not just dreams of what we thought we could be, but actual steps toward building a life that reflected who we truly were, not who we were expected to be. We started talking about marriage, about what we wanted our life together to look like. And as we talked, I realized something important. This wasn't about the wedding or the approval of anyone else. This was about our love, our commitment, and our journey together. Arthur, in his own way, became a part of that journey. He began to spend more time with us, though in his own quiet way. He never fully let go of his eccentricities, his need for control, but there was a subtle shift in him too. He started showing up for dinner, sometimes unannounced, just to talk. And each time he did, he brought a little more of his old self with him. The man who had built an empire was slowly allowing himself to be vulnerable, to open up. And I could see the difference it was making, not just in David, but in Arthur himself. Months later, we stood together in the garden of my parents' house, surrounded by friends and family, as we said our vows. It wasn't a grand affair. It wasn't a wedding that would make headlines or fill magazines. But it was perfect in its own way. It was ours. Arthur was there, standing in the front row, a soft smile on his face. And around his neck, as it had been the day we first met, was the same cashmere scarf I had given to that homeless man. Now, it wasn't just a symbol of my kindness, it was a symbol of the change that had taken place in all of us. As I looked at David, my husband, I realized that everything we had gone through, every test and every challenge, had led us here, to this moment. And I knew, with complete certainty, that our future was no longer shaped by the past, but by the choices we made today. As I stood there, hand in hand with David, looking around at the faces of our loved ones, I couldn't help but think about the incredible journey that had brought us here. From the first moment I met David, to that life-changing dinner with Arthur, to the quiet moments where we both learned what truly mattered, kindness, integrity, and the power of being true to oneself, this was the beginning of something new. A new chapter, a new life. Together. Our journey wasn't perfect, and it didn't need to be. But the love we had built, the trust we had forged, and the lessons we had learned would guide us for the rest of our lives. And as we looked toward the future, I knew that whatever challenges came our way, we would face them together, stronger than ever before. If you've enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of Arthur's unconventional way of testing David? Was it the right approach? Let me know what you think. And if you want to see more heartwarming, inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep bringing you the best content, and we appreciate every one of you. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching, and remember, true worth is not measured by what you have or who you know, but by the kindness you show to others. Stay kind, and take care.